Hey, everybody, welcome back. We are here with Robert B. Davis II, and we are going through his book, our weekly walkthrough of his book, Purpose and Form, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics. And in today's episode, we're going to be going through chapter 12, which is entitled The Great Revealed Truth of Divine Intimacy. How are you doing today, Rob?
Doing great.
Excellent. Excellent. Could you start us off by kind of giving us a general rundown, overview of this chapter? I know it's a little shorter of a chapter, but there's still a lot of nuggets, many nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, so this chapter is sort of like a cap of what we've been doing so far in part two, or a recap of some of the parts of it. So we just did a couple chapters on Christianity, issues in Christianity, and some of the themes there. Then we did a chapter on Buddhism, and we're looking at, what do we see there when we sort of strip away the ways that Buddhism has been popularly portrayed and take a look and see what is actually there in the teachings. What are they pointing at? What does the story say? What kind of life and attitude is this trying to imbue in people? And then in those, I point out some similarities. And then this chapter is a focus on a particular key point, I think, that I believe comes out in both traditions and is sort of this underlying, it's an assumption, but we also don't really recognize that we assume it. And it's a miraculous reality, yet it is sort of the foundational reality for everything we do and for these two great traditions. And that's what I call the divine intimacy, that the divine is intimate with the, whatever you might say, the profane, or the infinite is intimate with the finite. It's not, there's not a disconnect there. There's not a estrangement. There's not a dissatisfaction. There's actually a loving and caring relationship there. So the whole chapter is just sort of focusing on that point specifically and drawing it out, as full as can be, hopefully.
So the infinite is within the finite, and then the finite is within the infinite. And it seems like if we were to look at it one way going to the other, the finite being a part of the infinite has nothing to do on our end. That's just as it is. But
Mhm.
on the flip side, there is something there where we have to connect almost. Um, we have to make the decision to connect with the infinite, to an extent. What would be the means of doing that?
Well, yeah. So, like you said, the infinite being connected to the finite is a property of the infinite itself. That is just a given. Um, and then the flip side of us connecting to the infinite, the means of doing that, uh, the step one is the fact that the infinite is connected to the finite. You couldn't do it unless that was already true. So, and this is one of the reasons why, as I was coming around to Christianity to myself, I really thought they got right the idea of salvation. That salvation is something you don't earn, you could never earn, you don't achieve, you don't build it. It's just there. It's there by grace, as Christians would say. But so that's really, that's a hurdle that would be impossible to ever surmount. So that's the biggest thing and the first thing and the most important thing is that connection is established through no effort of our own, through no merit of our own. But I think, especially modern and maybe particularly American Christianity goes to the level of saying, that's all that's important, and we play no part in any sort of relationship with the divine. It's all on the divine's end, and we don't. Our effort is completely irrelevant, and that's a practical problem because then it takes away your, your the best purpose you have in your life. Um, but then it also metaphysically um, makes you irrelevant. Everything's the divine, and then there's you, and why are you here? So we do have a part to play, and theologically, this is called synergism, where our will is compatible with God's will, where God acts and his action doesn't compete with our action. They can overlay each other or not overlay each other, but they're on two different levels, so they're not competing. It's not like God gives 100% and that means I must give 0%, or God gives 50% and therefore I must give 50%. It's God gives 100% and then we are also free to give up to 100%. And it could be in line with God or it could be not. So what we can do practically would be, one, have some amount of faith in the possibility that it might be true that the infinite is intimately aware of and caring for the finite, that you have there's an infinite divine interest in your life. So just being aware of that, then the natural response is, okay, if that's true, then I can speak things into nothingness and say what I'm thinking, what I'm hoping for, what I don't understand. I can pray. I can start praying. That's where that starts. And then, um, and then going from there, but living, you know, hopefully living a life that accords with divine will, and more and more so.
And in the book, I think that was an excellent description of, I think it was, as you touch in the book as well, you use the word engagement. It takes one to engage, uh to then be able to develop that intimacy to then become effective.
Right. Right. So, so the book was written several years ago. Before I wouldn't have been able to tell you what synergism was, or how the theology of that worked. But this idea of this idea was present, that the infinite was intimately connected to the finite. There was this connection, this interest, and then there was purpose in our lives. Our lives weren't just um, meaningless shows. Like the infinite's not just watching a TV show on as a relaxation long day of work, and turn on the Rob channel and turn the brain off. Um,
Sounds like a Rick and Morty.
right. So I had that, and then this idea of engagement. There's a little bit of play on the word there, because we think engagement like I'm leaning in, I'm enacting, I'm participating as much as possible. But there's also the idea of marriage engagement, and this sort of is a little bit lost on us now. But traditionally, engagement was the announcement of an intent to become intimate. That's what that word would have meant at one point in time. And so I think it works on both those levels of, if we are engaged to life, that means we are putting ourselves into it. We're stepping forward. We're trying. We've got a purpose. We're making effort, all that. And that is all, there might be modern psychologists who are unhappy about it, but no one can deny that engaging is a more successful, more effective strategy than not engaging. Um, so, so it works on that level, but then there's also the level of being engaged to life, being engaged to the truth, the light and the light and the life, you are moving towards intimacy with life and the source of life. And you do that not say this, you don't do that exclusively through inner work, pulling back and disassociating from life. There's a time, a place, there's methods for um, inward movement and isolation and silence and all that. That I'm not denying that, but ultimately, it's not a the world is not a illusion and a trap. The world is there with a purpose to be engaged with, and by moving into that engagement, you are engaging with not only what's in front of you, but what the source of that which is in front of you, the thing that God who put those obstacles, those difficulties, those annoyances, whatever they are, in front of you and part of your life. By engaging with those, you engage with God.
That's it. Yeah. And so, although we have two different interpretations of the word engagement, nonetheless, they're still roughly or relatively similar in the sense that it takes one's ability to participate,
Mm.
active desire to participate in reality, in life. Um, I think of the opposite of being engaged as being detached, as being disassociated, and through that comes uh, various forms of ways to block out emotions or block certain things out. So you think of drugs, you think of risky activities, you think of sinful activities that detach you in a sense from being fully engaged in life. And
Yeah,
through that pathway of being engaged consistently, or at least having the desire to engage, you then develop that intimacy with the infinite, with God. And
mhm.
that then you become effective in what you're doing. Is that right? Because you
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, and then again on two levels. So one, you you become effective when you're cooperating with God. I mean, God is the most effective by definition. So if you're working with the will of God, then you know you're on the winning team. So it's you become effective in that manner. You know, you what does it say in the Bible? All things work to the benefit of those who believe or those with faith. Um, so you have sort of the total will of the cosmos and the creator of the cosmos aligned with you to the degree that you're aligned with it. Um, and then um, and then also when you are engaged with life, when you're becoming effective, you you enter in and you're down, you're basically getting your hands dirty. You're doing the work yourself. You're not so there's that synergism of yes, it's God's will, but you're working it out with your hands. So you become very familiar with work and then that the more familiar you are with trying to make things happen to yourself, generally the better you get at making things happen because you learn.
That's
You
exactly.
learn. Yeah.
Failing. I think of engaging and then going through trials and errors, and you don't really know certain things until you do become intimate with them, until you do get your hands dirty, you do engage with them, then you become familiar with that. Otherwise, you're essentially just working things out in your mind. And I mean, for instance, there's plenty of times I'll watch like American Ninja or something from a comfortable couch, and I'm like, I could do that. No, you
Yeah.
know. And then I have access to like monkey bars. I'm like, crap, so it does take that level of engagement, and I think that and that's why you see those in leadership that started out as an hourly employee or started out doing the work that most employees do, there's generally that level of there's more of a connection because now the management or now the leadership knows exactly what the hourly is going through and can make decisions accordingly to keep them doing well and to be more effective and to be efficient and to be a good employee. Otherwise, there's that separation. You have those in the at the top of the ivory tower and then the rest down below. Total disconnect. Uh, and I think it's what was Marie Antoinette that said, "Let them eat cake." You know, it's that similar disassociation there. So it takes that level of engagement.
Right.
Uh,
And
yeah,
that's the Christian message, right? Is that the boss, the manager, the God came down and worked the lowest position,
exactly. That's
right?
exactly,
I
yes.
mean, as banal as that
Yeah.
example sounds, like that's actually the claim is that God came to earth, did the work that we're supposed to be doing, and even did it while we were telling him not to do it
Yeah.
and threatening him, and then ultimately tortured him to death for doing the work that we were all supposed to be doing. So, the claim is and in many theological systems, you have this idea, like Platonism, for the most part, you have this idea of a removed, uh, disconnected divine realm. And it's like, yes, it's divine, that's great, but it kind of just looks at human life and it's like, meh, meh,
Yeah.
you know, we're better than that. That's for humans. That's annoying, gross stuff. Like maybe they should contemplate us and that's great, but we have nothing to do with them. Whereas the Christian claim is that God so loved the world, God entered into the world in the lowest point and lived a full life there. So,
That's exactly it. That's exactly it, you know? I mean that connects perfectly with that analogy of good leadership having to work in the trenches.
right.
It's exactly the story of Christ coming down in
Mhm.
human form and working and toiling in the trenches with humanity as humanity, you know, kicked him in the shins.
Right, right.
So yeah, I did want to talk about that. There is a specific sentence towards the end of the chapter that I really, really liked. It sticks out quite a bit. I sums things up perfectly. But before we get into that, I want you you spoke about prayer a little earlier. Um, and then in a chapter prior in Eastern Enlightenment, we talked about the importance and significance of meditation. What is the difference between prayer and meditation?
Hmm. Well, for starters, it depends on what kind of meditation you're doing. And broadly, there are there's Eastern and Western meditation, and Eastern meditation meaning like Indian, Buddhist, that realm. Uh, for the most part, at least as we know it nowadays, has been categorized by the sort of passive meditation, where very broad brush view, but you're just noticing things and then letting them pass. And so you're going for you could say you're going for a detachment from any thought, or any mental state or preference or whatever it is. And so you're detaching from things in that way. Um, and I mean, that's a whole discourse in itself of how Christians should or shouldn't or might feel about that type of meditation. When Christianity talks about meditation, generally the Western meditation has meant concentration on a particular topic. So it's an active meditation. It's a focus. And in that sense, prayer and meditation are pretty similar, in some cases interchangeable. There's other types that are out there. I'm not claiming that's everything, but just broadly, those two are what you see. And then from the Western view, prayer and meditation are very close. Whereas um, with Eastern meditation, where it's very passive, that would be quite different than what most people think of. and practice in prayer where they're actively seeking something. And the word prayer means asking. To pray something, I pray of you, is I'm asking you. So it really just means asking, requesting. And so, whereas meditation could be, uh, you're not requesting, I mean, you sort of through a concentrated meditation, you're requesting insight or knowledge implicitly, but you are focusing on a subject, whereas prayer, you are just sort of voicing these concerns, desires, hopes. And I would say, there's a spectrum within that, and most of it's good.
Excellent. Yeah, that was a very good answer. Thank you. Um, so this sentence is the reality of the infinite and its intimate conscious connection to the finite individual is the necessary basis for all ethics, as well as the source of all purpose, meaning, and salvation. And that's exactly it. I mean, it's fundamentally about breaking this cycle, this trend, this plague of nihilism and atheism and meaninglessness and purposelessness, and kind of metaphysically slapping them across the face and saying there is purpose, there is meaning, and it's found in the infinite. And then people try to rationally and analytically conceptualize the infinite, and it's very difficult because they're still trying to think using that scientific rationalism, but that binary way of thinking, when it takes more than that, and it begins through that engagement, through that synergy, through aligning yourself with God through your actions. And many times it happens inadvertently. A lot of people that are on the path might not even know it. They're just being good people, and they might not have a set rhetoric. But it's those that have been brainwashed to think that there's nothing, that there's no God, that it's just this finite experience, and all we have are our five senses, and anything outside of that is not only is it irrelevant, but it doesn't exist. Um, and that really handicaps people. And so this book really shows the importance of infinity within the finite and the finite within the infinite. And it brings it to light. And I think that sentence really, really capitalizes on it. Before we close out this chapter, and after this chapter, because I know it was kind of a short chapter, Rob has a short story available on his Substack, and it is called "Living Under Controlled Abundance." And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit. But before we do that, Rob, is there anything else that you wanted to go over about this chapter, or any closing comments or remarks?
Well, I'd like to read this quote that I find both both edifying and quite amusing. So this is from, it's a translation into English, but it's from a Zen Buddhist monk living in the 12th or 13th century, so the better part of 1,000 years ago. And he said, talking about, this is in the theme of talking about how our action in the world is important, how our action is part of our purpose, and how that ties into a divine purpose. He said, this is Dogen, the behavior of Buddhists makes the earth manifest itself as God and ripens the Milky Way into delightful cheese. So I think that's a great quote.
That is a good quote. I remember reading that one. I was like, that's peculiar, but it
Yeah.
makes sense.
So the author there, he has a note on it. I remember reading specifically like on translating that part, and it is a translation, and he's translating essentially a metaphor or a play on words. So it's a little bit difficult, but he made a case that that's sort of the best way to translate it. And I just like that quote. He ripens the Milky Way into a delightful cheese.
Dude,
Um,
delightful. It's like, you think of these haughty academics going through these books, reading,
right.
reading, reading, and then you come with that, and it's just like profound.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, but I mean, it is profound.
It is, yeah.
As silly as it is, he's talking about the connection that human development has to the development of the cosmos. He's saying that the individual actions of a person are part of the maturing of the cosmos itself.
It's a,
That is profound. Yeah.
the micro really builds on that macro there, those individual, you think of just the progress of humanity and all the human beings that have ever lived. And we got a select few that we admire and we keep fresh in the history books, but nonetheless, each individual has had an impact. It's like when you think of reaching the number 500, right? Most people look at the number 500 as being the number. Oh, this is the number that got us to 500. But they don't look at the other 499 that are just as important as that 500, because if they weren't there, that 500 wouldn't be there.
Right, right. And this ties back to the earlier chapter on the myth of secularism, when we talked about how the secular view and the materialist view offers no real hope for redemption. I mean, the best case they have is that there's this future state where everyone will have figured things out and will live in material abundance and an ideal socialist society like Star Trek kind of thing. Like, okay, that's nice, but what about everyone who's living now in terrible times and like all the people being murdered and raped and whatever it is? What about them?
Right.
Like their lives don't count in that model. I mean, they're only stepping stones to the place where it's good. And then we just have to forget the fact that, it was so terrible until we got here, assuming that we ever got there. Whereas the view of an intimate, infinite connection to each individual is that each individual life has an infinitely significant part to play. Yeah, and the way the metaphor you were using reminded me of I talk a little bit on the book or mention briefly the movie The Prince of Egypt because as I read through the Bible and read the story of Moses, I was like, I'm not getting what this is supposed to be saying. And then I watched the movie and I was like, oh, this is a beautiful story once you bring it to life. One of my favorite songs from there starts off, um, does does the stone that sits on the mountain's top think it's more important than the stones that form the base? Like it's all part of the mountain. So that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That was such a good movie. I remember that as well. And then getting older, reading through the Bible, it's like, wait a minute, I don't think Aaron was in Prince of Egypt.
He's in it, yeah.
Oh, is he really? Okay, okay.
Mhm.
I just might not have. It's been a while since I've seen that. But they had a
Yeah,
good streak of films. Also,
yeah,
Road to El Dorado, fantastic film.
yes.
Anyway, I digress. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 12, essentially. Uh,
Mhm.
and then next week we'll be going over chapter 13, which is the great mystery that divine perception is dependent on or connected to physicality. But before we go, Rob has a short story on Substack called Living Under Controlled Abundance. And I have finished it. I finished it earlier this week, and I had no idea what it was going in, but I'm really glad that I read it. Um, the way it's broken down, everything is just very well written. I mean, a perfect before Rob, before we go into the meaning and why you wrote it, I want to give you praise for this because not a lot of authors do this anymore. Most authors have a tendency of just going over dialogue with very minor setups or details, and you've struck a perfect balance of dialogue as well as setting up the scene between the characters. You know, you get a good visual of what the characters are. And that's difficult with short stories as well. You know, it usually takes a few chapters to kind of build up a connection with the characters, but off the bat, just after a few paragraphs, you can identify with them, or at least understand them, and you have a good idea of who they are. So Rob, please walk us through what was living under controlled abundance.
Well, it was an evolving project. I tend to, as I'm working, my main focuses tend to be on more heady, academic-y, intellectual stuff. And then there seems to come a point where, well, my brain ripens into delightful cheese, what you might say. But then my brain is just sort of saturated with that and needs another outlet. And I've really always enjoyed writing creatively and writing short stories, had somewhat of a knack for it. Um, I wrote a short story at one point that was for class and saved on my home computer, and my brother found it like I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, and it scared the crap out of him. He thought I had gone insane or something because he was like didn't know the context. So it's been something I've enjoyed, and I often forget how much I enjoy it, and then I come back to it. So it takes me a while to get to another fiction work, usually several years between them. So this one came out of just being saturated in sort of the intellectual side of things and really out of my other project, Defund the Fun Police, which I've tried to not make overly academic, but it is a approach through reason and intellect on some level, and at least requires a lot of setup on that realm. So I was sort of in the realm of fighting with the ideas of equity and the DEI stuff and the takeover of modern corporations and systems and societies and that sort of stuff. And then I had an idea for a single short story, which ended up being the first chapter in the book. But I had the one idea and thought it was morbid, but also good. And so I started working on that. And then another one popped up. And then I was like, oh, I could connect these. And so it ended up being a short series of short stories and all falling together rather nicely in the end. Um, and I'm hoping that it'll, scratch the other itch and be a little bit more accessible than dry argumentation for some people.
Yeah, you start off that speaking of engagement, it hooked me. It hooked me very early on, right at the beginning. You start off and you break out each story with like a set of rules of what the controlled abundance guidelines are, the parameters of living within this. And I believe that term would be an oxymoron. You have controlled and then you have abundance. So you think of controlled as being finite, and then you think of abundant as being infinite, and but they don't actually balance out. They're polar opposites, but you combine them together, you get controlled abundance. And it's a complete uh set of mental gymnastics that we go through
Hmm.
here in this story.
Yeah,
Um,
so I you know, when I set out to write, I don't know why it didn't occur to me at first, but it didn't totally occur to me until the very end of the book. And I sent you the basically the manuscript copy, so that's on a Word document and gets to have, a few things that Substack doesn't have, like different fonts. And I put the chapter titles in sort of a horror type of font, and it's like, oh, this is actually kind of a horror story, maybe more than kind of. But I don't think of myself as you know writing horror stories in any sense of the word, but then I think, oh, this is kind of horrifying at the end, well, throughout it, but as it goes. So, I mean, I hope it's not strictly a horror story, but it kind of has that element to it. Um, so it was a fun project.
Yeah, I could tell you had fun with it, and I think it would be considered horror simply because we're looking at a very possible future. Uh,
Yes, yeah.
it's so
So
it's so bizarre to us now looking at it because it's not here yet. I mean, there's rumbling, there's rumors, and I'll let you expand on that in a second here. But there's that almost disconnect because you're listening or you're reading about people in the story that have normalized this stuff, and it's borderline on the horizon now, and it's just eerie. And I think that's where a lot of the horror comes in. It's because they're rationalizing a lot of these absolutely crazy socialist bonkers agendas, and we're like, wait a minute, that's actually, that's a real possibility here. Could you go into that a little bit?
Well, so I call the tagline that I came up with it. My sales pitch is this is 1984 for the TikTok generation.
That's
So
exactly. Yeah.
1984 is a short book in itself. Mine is shorter and it's composed of short stories, kind of like reels. So I really, uh, I like the punchiness, I like the shortness, but I think it also fits the time. Unfortunately, people aren't uh, much readers anymore, so I'm hoping to that plays in my favor of having that sort of quick iteration. And now I'm releasing it on Substack a chapter at a time, so sort of bite-sized pieces. I tend to release big, long things all at once, and that has met with little success. So try something new and try to write the little 4 minute read kind of things that hopefully will gather some more initial attraction, and then that'll get people who would be more serious interested in it. So yeah, in 1984 for the TikTok generation, it's a world not too far away, and that's unfortunate.
It is.
But mhm.
It's a real possibility, though. You talk about, I mean, without giving away any of the plot, just some of the themes you talk about, uh, a very robust social credit score system, uh,
Yeah.
and that plays into the characters and kind of some of the decisions they make, and even normalizing what would be considered degenerate and belligerent and sinful activities for the greater good of the population, to increase their social credit score. You talk about the effects of uh, climate change and how that
Mhm.
affects people's everyday lives and I guess mental well-being. If people get afraid or scared because they see a little exhaust fume or they see something going on, how does that eat away at people, or people that have bought into it to the point to where they're trying to contain cow farts for the environment. um on top of that, you also talk about uh I would say nihilism as well, and meaninglessness. There's definitely a character or a few characters in this story that have completely given up hope. You talk about, and what are some of the things that they've gone through and are going through, that have gotten them to that position, and then how are they dealing with it once in that position? Another issue or another subject that you bring up as well is gender identity. And it kind of threw me for a loop because there's a character in there that goes by they, and reading that, it took me a second to always understand that you're referring to this specific character. And I think that there's another character in there as well that you referred to as it. And so I'm reading this, and it's just it. That's what I mean when I said mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. So it is. There is an aspect of that horror, but again, it's just the format's incredible.
Mhm.
So I highly recommend it if you've got, a couple of hours over the weekend, or, you're trying to kill some time, or not. I mean, if you just want to engage in a good story, that's it, and hey, it's made for the TikTok generation, so it takes a couple hours, and it sucks you right in from the beginning. So Rob, how can we find this work?
Yeah, so it's on Substack, and I'm releasing it chapter by chapter. Right now, chapter 3 just came out actually. The first one, might take you 15 minutes to read because it has an introduction there as well, slightly longer, but then chapter 2, chapter 3 are hopefully 5 8-minute read, and then so it's going to come out bi-weekly, so not too slow, but hopefully, bite-sized pieces and steady enough to not keep you hanging too long, but build some suspense. So that you can find it on Substack. You can go to Substack and search Robert B. Davis II, or search Living Under Controlled Abundance. I believe you'll be able to find it that way. The title of my Substack, the name is also called Become a Cleric. A little bit of a odd choice, but kind of a joke. But anyhow, Become a Cleric, that would be the title to look for. The title of the channel, essentially. The
That is, I'm sorry, that has become a cleric, become a cleric. Okay.
Yes, yes. That's like the channel title. Like, here's Indomitable Soul Man. Over on Substack, it would be Become a Cleric. So um searching on Substack, it's also I think we'll link it here, and I'm putting it out on my Facebook page as well. And if it's not already up there, then I will include a link to the Substack on my website as well in my book section.
Excellent. All right.
Oh, one more thing. As far as Substack goes, it'll come up with a box that asks you to subscribe. You can just exit out of that box if you want to. It's not asking for any money. There's no obligation. You can still X out and you can still read it. So I know it's sometimes a pop-up comes up and people are like, go to another page. Just X out of it and read it. And not asking you to sign up or anything. If you're hooked, then sign up for the next one. But don't, it's not asking for money or anything at this point. And I don't intend to make it anytime in the future.
So just out there for us to enjoy.
Yes.
If anybody's on the fence of maybe picking up this book because it is a little longer, they can get a nibble of your work here on the Substack, enjoy it
Mhm.
because it's good, and then buy the book. Uh,
Yeah.
and then read this fantastic work that we're going through. So everybody, we are going through Purpose and Form, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics by Robert B. Davis II. This book is available on Amazon, though if you type in Purpose and Form, it's not going to come up. You'll also have to type in Robert B. Davis II in that search bar in order for it to pull up. Though you don't have to do that, because I will be leaving a link in the description down below, along with a link to Rob's website, which will give you a list of his works that he's done, because this isn't the only book that he's written, and that is not the only thing available on Substack. I believe you have another work on Substack as well.
Yes, Defund the Fun Police is up on there as well.
Yes, so check that out as well. If you get a little hankering for a little bit more of his writing, and you're waiting for this story to come out, you also have Defund the Fun Police available for your reading pleasure. Um, we will be seeing you next week, everybody. Those of you that are in Florida that have been affected by Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene, everybody in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee, our thoughts and our prayers are with you. Please take care. Please stay safe. God bless, and may peace be with you.